Hey guys, Andy here, instructor at the Bujinkan Hakubai-kan dojo here in Mississauga, Ontario. So, as you can see from my background today, we are in the garage, my little workshop corner here, because in today's video, I'm going to deviate a little bit and was thinking about some different video ideas, and today we're going to do a little one-day build. So, topic for today is we are going to build a Kusarigama. In my opinion, one of the easier tools, one of the easier practice weapons to build. But before we get to that, I will make a short disclaimer. So, despite the Kusarigama being a weapon that is taught in the Bujinkan Budo Taijutsu system, I have little to no training with the thing, today is just going to be more of an informative video, just mainly on how to actually make one for yourself rather than actually use it. That said, I do have a little bit of experience with some other flexible weapons, so it kind of helps me out a little bit, but if you want to learn how to use one of these things, I highly suggest going to your, to the closest qualified instructor. But with that out of the way, just going to get into some brief history first. So Kusarigama, break it down into two words, kusari and gama. So the kama is, probably one of the most common tools, one of the most common agricultural tools that you see pretty much all around the world, not just Japan, but pretty much in every major culture for the past few centuries have had sickles. It's very simple to make. It's a wooden handle, and you got a nice steel blade on top, and you use that to harvest your crops. But back in medieval Japan, the Kusarigama was at some point in history favored by the samurai. It's just such an odd weapon, but reportedly it was fairly effective, especially people armed with bladed weapons like swords. The Kusarigama being a two-handed weapon, you hold the sickle in the one hand, then you hold the chain, you swing it with the other hand, was very effective supposedly in being able to bind, being able to disarm, being able to essentially sweep enemies off their feet, right? So this was a really interesting weapon. And for those of you that don't know, aside from being a Bujinkan Budo Taijutsu instructor, I'm also an active student in Hyoho Niten Ichiryu. And for those who know the stories of Miyamoto Musashi, there is one fairly famous story of him. Now, historically speaking, we're not necessarily sure if it happened or not. It could have been well documented, could have been fantasy, we never really know. But supposedly one of his greatest opponent, and one of his trickiest opponents, a man named Hakubai-kan, was a master of Kusarigama. He was a master of the Sickle Chain. So that was very tricky for him because, if you know anything about Niten-ichiri or just Nitori, the two-sword style, it's very tricky to fight with two swords when there's somebody with a ball and chain wrapping them up. So supposedly that proved quite a challenge for him, and the only way that he won was he managed to throw a sword at him. Supposedly. But anyways, enough history out of the way. I'm going to try to make this a much quicker video because my last video, my Bojutsu 101 video, went on for almost half an hour. We're going to keep this one nice and short. You guys should be able to do this build in a few hours, and then get out there and practice. So let's get to it. First off, going to check our materials. Okay, so we're down here on the floor of the workshop. You guys are going to have to excuse me on this one. It's my first time doing any sort of how-to videos. So a little bit disorganized, but we'll work through that. So on the floor here, we have the main materials that we'll need to make us a Kusarigama. So note that a lot of these materials I just happen to have lying around, especially these two pieces of wood that I have here. These are basically scrap pieces. But most of these are available in, pretty much any hardware store or any, even a craft store that you can go to. But as far as materials are concerned, we got some tennis balls. So you're going to need one tennis ball per Kusarigama. We have some sort of rope, some sort of cordage. So this is just some 550 paracord that I have lying around the house. I'll mention this later once we get into the build. The length that you'll need varies depending on what kind of kusarigama you're making, but anywhere between, let's say 8 to 15 feet is pretty much good to go. Some sort of dowel. So if you're buying a dowel like a balsa or basswood dowel from a craft supply or from a hardware store, you're looking at about a 1-inch dowel. Now this, if you notice, this is a broomstick. So this is just a random broomstick I found lying around in the storage room, and looks like a few bits of it at the end are rotting away. So we're gonna hack off an end, and I'm just gonna use this as a handle for the kusarigama. Use what you got, especially if you got some scrap lying around. Might as well use it for something. So that's for our handle, and then lastly, another scrap piece of wood. I carve a lot of bokuto and a lot of little bits and pieces. In my spare time, it's just a spare kind of scrap slat of maple that I had lying around. So this is about a 1/4 inch thick. So this is, I'd say 1/4 inch is pretty much perfect for this type of quick build. Another kusarigama that I made, probably about a 1/2 inch thick, but this is going to be a lot easier to slot in. And then lastly, another piece of dowel. So this is probably going to be about maybe about 1/4 inch or smaller. Actually, I'd say maybe about an 1/8 of an inch size dowel. These, if I can get the camera to zoom in on this thing, you're going to see what these are for later. I'm going to cross pin, I'm going to glue and cross pin the blade of the kusarigama in. This is in fact scrap piece of mekugi. So mekugi are the little bamboo pins that hold the blade of the katana into the handle. When I replace mekugi on swords, either my own swords or somebody else's, the mekugi that I use as new replacements are fairly long. They're maybe about 3 inches long. So when you fit that to a new sword, you do have to cut some of the ends off, just so you can have a nice flush fit. That is exactly what this is. So I'm going to reuse some of my recyclable material, and hopefully at the end of this we'll have a kusarigama. So let's go over to the bench and let's start measuring and cutting. Okay, so now we are at the workbench getting ready to prep our wood for cutting. Don't pay attention to any of this stuff I got lying around over here. Lots of projects that I finished up and started while I was in quarantine. I'll be going back to work on Wednesday, and looks like it'll be a while before I get some time to clean it up. So we're not focusing on this, just over here. This broomstick that I showed earlier, going to be our handle. I've already marked it down right over here with my nice bright blue marker. So this is going to be the handle, and I've chosen a 12-inch handle for this one because it's going to give me a little more material to work with right at the end. So try to measure twice or more than twice and only cut the one time, because this is supposed to be a really quick build. The more adjustments you make, the longer it's going to take. So we want to try to get this on the first shot. So I've already measured at the 12-inch mark, so that is good for my handle. For my blade, it's going to be mounted perpendicular, just like this. So if I had to ballpark it, I would say that, even though these things don't really have a standard measurement, probably the best benchmark for this is your blade should be about half the length of your handle. So I have a 12-inch handle. It's going to be a 6-inch blade, but to add the little connection point for our rope and or chain, depending on what you're using, I'm actually going to add 2 inches to the end of my blade here. So it's going to be an 8-inch blade. So I'm just going to measure it right off at 8 inches. So again, make sure that your measurements are correct the first time. Excellent. So I have from my fingers, my index finger here to my index finger down here. That's an 8-inch piece of wood right there. This is a little wide, so I'm gonna have to end up trimming it down a little bit, but what I want out of this one, I'm gonna be looking at approximately 1 1/4 inches. So, being a piece of scrap wood, I have, this is at the actual edge of the board that it came off of. So this is completely level. So this is nice and flat. this side was cut, so it's a little wobbly. So I'm actually going to keep this side. I'm going to scrap this side. So I'm going to measure 1 1/4 inches on one end, 1 1/4 on the other end. And I'm just going to draw my nice straight line. Do I have a straight edge? Yes, I do. So I'm just going to measure a nice straight line down. Doesn't have to be pretty as long as you get that measurement. So now that we have this measured out, now this is just going to be the rough for our blade. I'm going to start shaping it after we've cut this portion out. So let's get on the saw. Okay, so I just got the handle and I just got the blade cut out to my approximate rough shape. Just before I get into starting to prep the assembly, I'm just going to smooth out some of the surfaces. So here I have my my cabinet making rasp. So this is a fairly fine rasp, fairly fine teeth. This is fairly soft wood, so I don't want to go too aggressive on it. I do have some other rasps and files if I want to work with something a little harder. This broomstick is fairly soft, so I'm just going to basically sand. I'm basically going to sand down the end here, get it nice and flat, and then I'm just going to go around the circumference with the rasp just to smooth out the corners and make sure that there's no splinters. Okay, so just like with the handle, that broomstick that I cut down, for the blade, I've gone ahead and taken my file and my rasp to it. So the side up here that I cut with my saw was a little rough, so I smoothed that down so you can see here, there's no cut marks left. It's nice and level, it's nice and smooth. And then I took my file to all 4 of these corners. So the edges are also nice and smooth because you have to remember this is going to be used for training. So if you're using this for a little bit of contact, you do not want any splinters or sharp edges because you don't want to cut your training partners. So I've gone ahead and I marked out 3 spots that I'm going to cut. So you can see here, I'm going to just hack the corners off here about 45 degrees. And this end over here, it's just going to be, about the same. It's definitely not a, clean 45 degrees, but I'm just going to cut it off at an angle and I'm going to leave it like this. So a lot of the times you see Kusarigama for training, it's going to be shaped a little more like a sickle. It's got that, that edge, or sorry, that tip that curves down into the edge, just for training purposes and just to make this go a little faster. I just opted to make a completely square and blunt point, just so we can build this thing a little tiny bit quicker. Okay, so just got off the saw with the blade. So now this has got pretty much its final shape. So I shaved the corners off the butt end and the point is going to be really nice and square. A lot safer because there's no point here, so I'm not going to accidentally, poke someone and, potentially puncture something. And then the end here, the handle, haven't really done anything to it yet, but now this is where everything gets a lot trickier. So this is going to be this is going to be the trickiest part of the entire build, is getting these two to sit together. So to do that, essentially, now, before I say anything else, again, just like when I cut this piece out originally, I am going to take a file and a rasp to the rest of these points, just make sure there's no sharp corners, no sharp edges on it, for safety. But the next thing that we're going to do is I'm essentially going to lay this right in the middle at the end of my little broomstick or my dowel here. And I'm basically going to use that as a measure, and I'm going to cut a slot, a square slot down to about, 1¼ inches, which is the width, the actual width of this blade piece. So I'm going to cut down on 2 sides, but for that we're going to drill a hole right in the middle. So that is going to create our slot, and then we're going to slot this piece in, and we're going to leave about 1 inch hanging off the end, because again, we're going to drill a hole there, and that is where our rope is going to attach. So let's drill those holes in, let's get that slot cut, and then we will fit this together so that we can move on to the rope and the weight at the end. All right, so prep is pretty much done. So you can see here on the handle, I've marked in, again, with my really nice bright blue marker. And it's not going to show after anyways because we're just going to sand it off. So I've marked where I'm going to cut that slot. So, the lines are a little thick, but the cuts are going to go down right on the inside of the line here. Now, after we actually cut this, I am going to, use a rasp and a file to adjust the fit in there. So I am going to try to cut this a little tiny bit smaller than what I measured out. In addition, I've marked this little line here. That is where I want my saw to stop, because I want the top of the blade to sit nice and flush right up top here. So this over here is the width of the blade. That is where I'm going to stop. So before we cut that slot in, just to relieve the actual saw, we are going to drill a hole right here, right at the top of that line. So basically both cuts are going to go right to the side of that hole, and then that's going to give me a nice solid piece of wood to knock out of there to create the slot. This is slightly smaller than 1/4 inch because I am going to have to remove some material once again. So just to make sure this fit is nice and tight, I've gotten something that's barely shy of 1/4 inch to drill that hole. And then I'm going to make my cuts on both sides to make that slot, knock it out, and then we are going to file on the inside of the hole so that we can fit the blade in. Okay, so I got our 2 pieces prepped and ready to go for gluing. So you can see here that I cut that slot in, and I used my rasp and I used a file so I could get that notch nice and square. And if you take the blade and that notch, it pinches down right at the end. The top is nice and flush, and I have about 1 inch of the butt end sitting right out there. So this is almost a complete unit. So right now, I'm just gonna get some glue going right in there. You don't have to worry about really smoothing out the inside of the slot over here, because you really want some of those rough edges to hold the glue in here. Now that said, this type of notch, especially for the type of technique you're gonna be using with Kusarigama, this is a little bit on the weaker side as far as the connection with the glue. So we are also going to drill 2 holes, or actually, I might actually go with 1 hole, and just cross pin it through so we have a nice solid mechanical connection in there to hold the blade into the handle. So I'm just going to get this glued up, and then we will just let that sit, let it dry. Then we're going to drill. Gluing is going to be pretty easy here. So I just have some pretty standard wood glue, nothing really fancy here. Now I usually use, I would usually recommend something like Type Bond 2 or Type Bond 3. I just happen to have this on hand and I ran out of the other stuff. So I'm just gonna fill this entire slot with glue. I'm just gonna get a good squeeze in there, so make sure you try to get all the sides covered. I am gonna get a piece of wood, or I'm probably gonna use a little sliver of metal just to get that nice and spread in there. I'm just gonna get my little spreader, spread a bunch of glue into that joint, get it nice and gluey. Don't worry about any glue spilling out the side, because that's exactly what you want. You want a little bit more because some glue is going to make its way out of the joint anyway. So just gonna get that nice and glued and nice and sticky there. Good. Also make sure you have a cloth on hand to wipe down some of the glue that's dripping off, and then I'm just gonna take my blade, made it in the handle over here, and I'm just gonna push down. Oh, it's upside down. And I'm just gonna push down until I start seeing a little bit of leakage there. Then I'm just gonna press, let that sit, and I'm just gonna use my finger here. And any of the glue that's coming off, I'm gonna try to use to fill in some of these gaps that are left behind in the slot. And I'm just gonna give it a quick wipe. Get a little more glue on this side, the back side here of this slot, because we want that bond to be nice and strong. I also want to fill in as many gaps as possible so it looks presentable, at least. I'm gonna fill in that gap here. Fill that gap over there. And we have a nice, tight bond between the two. So now I'm just gonna let this sit and dry. So this is probably going to be about an hour or two before it's actually strong enough to start drilling. But in the meantime, we will prep the easiest part of this whole build, which is the weight and the chain/rope at the end. Okay, while our glue's drying, we are going to work on the other end, which is the rope and the tennis ball. So over here, so you can see I started pre-cutting a hole right over here. My tennis ball, I just marked off 2 little X's for me to poke some holes into, just to cut. And no better tool for that than a good knife. So here I'm rocking my Spyderco Military today. Not sponsored by Spyderco, really wish I was. But yeah, nice and simple. I'm just gonna plop this right down on my table, on my work table, and I'm just gonna whittle my way into it. Now you do want to keep your hand out of the way for safety, and it's a little bit tricky to cut through this stuff unless you have a nice sharp edge, because this is a rubber shell. So, yep, just wiggle my way through, and there's our hole. So I'm just gonna make the exact same hole on the other side, and then we'll get to the rope. Okay, so just got the tennis ball out of the way, cut holes on both sides. The only other part that you'll need on this one is your rope. So I got my 550 paracord here. Now I already pre-cut this length and I sealed the ends off, but as far as length is concerned, for Kusarigama, I think 3 arms lengths. So I take the end and I pinch it, stretch it out, 1, 2, 3. So I got approximately 3 of my arm spans for the length of this cord. Now, paracord is nice and stiff, so a lot of times if your holes are cut big enough, you'll just be able to thread it through by hand, no problem. In my case, I cut one of the ends a little small, so I'm gonna use my needle nose pliers. So I got the small end over here. I'm just gonna shove the tip of my pliers through. It's stuck right at the end. I'm gonna open them, just clamp as close as I can to the end, and I'm just gonna hold and thread it straight through. So this is done. All I gotta do now, for you guys out there, especially the mountain climbers or some of the army guys or whatever, please don't roast me on my knots. I know I'm very bad at tying knots. I don't know them terribly well, but once you get this secured, just make a nice little loop. And honestly, for me, I just secure it with pretty standard square knot right at the end. So I'm just gonna, I don't want too much sticking through. Yep, so you want this. And I'm just gonna tie a pretty simple square knot right at the end. Boom, cinch it down, and that is gonna hold that shut. Now, I should have left this a little bit longer or shorter. So in my case, I'm probably just gonna trim it off at the end here. This is basically hard plastic at the end. So there is a chance that as you're whipping this thing through the air, if you happen to be sending this at your training partner, this might actually catch and maybe on the off chance, if it's going fast enough, produce a cut. You don't wanna do that. But you can see here, after I cut it, I just use a lighter or a torch, just holding it near the flame so that it melts because this is a plastic-based material. So I got this at the end. The other end, we are going to leave completely bare because this is the end that's going to be secured at the end of our sickle. So I will be back in about 2 hours after our glue is dried so that we can finish this up. All right, guys, welcome back. So take a look at this. That glue is completely solid now, so it's been about 2 hours since I let this sitting out. So we are going to do the final assemble on this before we sand it down and add our finish on top. So I've already taken the liberty of marking where these holes are going to go. So these two holes over here are going to be drilled for these pins. So this is about 1/4 inch. So I'm going to make 2 1/4 inch holes here, and I'm going to try to get it as tight as I can so that those pins make a really nice mechanical fixture to hold this blade in. On the back over here, so this hole is where our rope is going to go. So I have a approximately 5/16 inch drill bit for that. You can go a little bigger if you want to, but that all really depends on what material you're plopping in the end. Now, this is a good time to mention that this specific Kusarigama, the rope portion is going to attach to the back of the blade over here on the tang. If you have an eyelet screw or some sort of ring that you can put on the bottom, Kusarigama also come in a version where the chain affixes over here at the butt. Because this is made of a broomstick and it's nice and round, I'm not going to do that. I also don't have an eyelet screw, but because I have all this marked out already, I'm just going to drill some holes, and then we are going to start putting everything together, and then hopefully we'll have a nice training piece at the end of this. Okay, so you can see here that I have the 2 holes for the pins drilled, and I have this bigger hole for the little cord at the end. I did have to make a little revision. So if you look at this, this is what a full replacement mekugi looks like before you cut it down. So this is basically just a little chunk at the end. I actually had to cut a new one because one of the leftover scrap pieces I have at the end is just a tiny touch too small. So, another idea for if you guys don't have any of these pins or dowels lying around, if you're handy and you do some drywall work, one of these drywall plugs, you can pop one of those in, hammer it through. It will expand a little bit once you get it through the other side, and then you can just clip off the end. I'm not going to do that today because I have some pins. I have some actual wooden pins, or rather bamboo pins, so I'm not going to worry about that. Just an idea to think about. But before I get those pins in, first thing I'm going to do, get a little bit of glue going in the holes, and hopefully I don't knock the camera over by doing this. Oops, a little plugged up. Come on. Okay, just had to clear some leftover dry glue at the end of that, so I'm just going to get, doesn't have to be much, because it is a relatively tight fit. It's going to squeeze out a good amount of the glue anyway, but I want to kind of give it a little tap just to get the glue moving around in there. I'm going to get my first pin. It's going to find where it goes in. Come on, camera, focus properly. There we go. So I'm going to find where that pops in, and I'm just going to wiggle it around a bit, get it coated in glue, so you really want to just give that a little rotate, and then it goes right in. And you keep going until you see it pop out the other end. So you can see there that, oh, hopefully, let me just get that focus going. There we go. So you can see right there, I have the other end popping out. So this is actually the larger end. I can't get that all the way through with my finger, so I have my hammer here. So I'm just gonna tap that until the entire pin is flush on one side. And I got a little stick in on that side. That is gonna get cut off. I'm gonna take my second pin, do the exact same thing. This one's gonna be a little bit tighter because it's a fresh Mekugi pin. So again, I'm just gonna get that nice and lathered up. You can kind of do it in a reverse also by putting the glue on the pin, then, you know, lathering it around a little bit, but just gonna go this way for today. Gonna pop that in. Gonna get that as far in as I can. Be very careful at this point. Now these are bamboo, so they will actually collapse and shrink a little bit. If you're using wooden dowel, you know, 1/4 inch balsa wood dowel, there is a good chance either the dowel is gonna split, or if the shaft, the handle that you're using is made of too light or too weak of a material, it could split the handle. So I'm just gonna be really careful. Nice. Okay, so that is sitting in nice and tight, and again, it comes out the other end. Now, obviously, I'm gonna lose a little bit of glue, but for all intents and purposes, functionally, this is actually completely done. The only thing I really have to do, sanding, so obviously you can see where I still have a little bit of blue marker left on it. Might be a few, you know, there might be a few small gaps that I have to fill in. Nothing serious, but otherwise this is already a functional training tool. Only thing I'm gonna clean up right now on camera is I'm gonna cut these two ends off. I'm gonna sand everything down, get it really nice and flush. I'm gonna take a knife to the entire perimeter of this hole and on the other side, just so I get all the splinters out, so, you know, it doesn't get stuck in the cord, or, you know, it doesn't cut it over time. But yeah, otherwise that is pretty much the wooden portion. Now obviously the glue for the pins is gonna dry, but pretty much it's completely solid now, so it's not going to come out, and especially, you know, this isn't really used for super hard contact practice anyway, so it's going to be a long time before this blade is ready to come out. If anything, I made the blade out of maple wood, so it might actually outlast the really kind of, you know, cheapy broom handle material that I used for this handle here. So yeah, I'm just gonna finish this up, and then I'll be right back. All right, so we got the kama pretty much completely sanded down. So I just started with some 40 grit sandpaper, you know, nice and coarse, just to you know, take out some of the bumps and you know, remove some of that old glue on there. Little change of plan, so you know, I still have some paint and whatnot lying around. So I thought, you know what, why not? Couldn't get all of the blue marks off of this, obviously, because the blue does soak in after a while. So this entire thing is going to be lacquered black. So I got the spray lacquer over here. So nothing, again, nothing fancy. You get it at any hardware store. And this, in this instance, is probably better because this is two different types of wood. So, you know, if you oil over it, you know, kind of on the fence about that, right? Because you have maple over here, and then you have, you know, who knows what type of wood this is. So I got everything nice and sanded down, prepped for our paint. So I'm just gonna get that lacquer sprayed right on there. Then I'm just gonna have it sit for about an hour. We're gonna attach our rope, and then this thing is ready to go. Okay, so we are getting right to the end of this build now. All that's left is to attach the parts, and we're good to go. So I have my kama here in nice, slick ninja black. This is the only thing I like about having super hot weather. It's like been 30 degrees today, so everything is nice and warm. Really helps the lacquer and the paint to dry really quick. So we got our little, kind of hard to see there, have our little eyelet. We have our little hole right over here. Again, just like I mentioned, if you have a flat end, or you could possibly do it on a rounded end like this, you have an eyelet screw, just screw it right into the end there, and then you can have this attached there. I prefer my Kusarigama with the chain actually attached to the back of the blade. So I'm going to bring this in nice and close. Now again, I'm not a knot expert here, but you basically just do whatever the hell it takes to get the job done. So I'm just going to thread it through. I'm going to have that, untangle my rope here. So I'm going to have that come right through. I'm just going to loop it through the end. Now, I'm going to hold it right between my knees here so you guys can see me tying that knot, hopefully. So nice and simple here, a little bit lower. So nice and simple, just like the other end, I'm just going to tie a square knot right off, just like that. So that is now attached. And then this end over here, you can either snip it off and heat the end there so it gets beaded up. So this is, I actually retrimmed it. So there's a brand new bead on there that I melted on. So this is already pretty secure, but just so that you don't have this short end flopping all over the place, just really nice and easy. You can just tie a little hitch right there. And that holds everything in nice and tight. So now I don't have this end flopping around. That is a finished Kusarigama. And here we have it. So this is the finished product. I have my kama on the one end with a nice blunt tip so I don't have to worry about hurting anybody during training. I got my nice long rope here that I can just coil up in my hand and give myself some extra length if I need it. It's always better to have more than less of it in case you do want to shorten it over time. And then right at the end of that, I have my tennis ball. I have been bopped by one of these several times doing Kusarigama. It doesn't hurt as much as you think it does. It's hollow, especially with the two holes on the side. It's a lot squishier than it otherwise would be. But, overall, this probably took 4 or 5 hours to make, including the time it took for the paint and the glue to dry. So, you dedicate an entire day to this, or even 12 hours, you're going to have a whole set of these things ready to go and just play around with. Hopefully I had a lot of fun doing this build video. I make a lot of other different types of weapon. This is only really the second or third Kusarigama I've ever made. In the future, I do want to put out some more build videos, so hopefully I'll get to that sometime soon. If you'd like to see some more and take a look at my work, you can check us out at Hakubai-dojo.com. You can find us on Facebook /Saga Taijutsu, and you can find our Instagram tag at Hakubai-kan Dojo. So, hope you guys enjoyed this build video, and until next time, see ya.